Hi there, I'm Ms. Schaefer, and I'm here to talk to you today about the start of our new unit, All About Learning. So, let's get started with what is learning. We talk about this word all the time, and it's frequently used in school. But what does it mean in the context of psychology? Well, for us, this unit, learning is about a relatively permanent change in an organism's behavior due to experience. A lot of times we talk about learning in the context of memorizing things, like you learning about learning is you memorizing things. But this unit isn't on memory. It's going to be mostly about the change in behaviors. So, in this unit, we're going to be looking at a few of the contemporary approaches to psychology. If you want, you can pause for a minute, see if you can remember the 7 contemporary ones and some keywords for them. One of the biggest perspectives we're going to be looking at this unit is the behaviorist perspective, because this one is all about behaviors, which is what we're looking at changes in. The behaviorist approach really is going to focus on 2 main ideas. One, psychology should be an objective science, right? And how can we do this very objectively, only looking at the action in their behavior? We don't know what's going on in the mind, therefore we're not really going to focus on that. Instead, we're going to see if we give some sort of input, a stimulus, right? See what action or output comes out. We're not really going to look at any mental processes involved. We're looking at predicting and controlling behavior through inputs and outputs rather than actually thinking about the internal motivations for them. Now, you may be sitting here going, but wait, I know I think, I know I feel. You may be taking more of the cognitive perspective. Right? There are psychologists who are going to argue that the reason we change our behaviors is because we have thought process behind our actions. We are predicting things, expecting things. We make choices and we have attitudes. So the cognitive perspective is going to argue against the behavior, saying, these actions are not just mindless mechanisms. These 2 approaches really do sort of contrast here, where the behaviorist perspective really does not acknowledge the internal mental processes. The cognitive model is going to focus on them a lot more. So again, this is how we can look at the same behaviors in multiple different ways. There's also the biological approach to learning that we'll see in this unit, and one of the biggest ideas we'll see here is biological preparedness, which talks about how animals and humans are biologically predisposed to learn certain stimulus-response pairings more quickly than others. These are typically going to be things that are predisposing us to survival. So it's kind of that evolutionary approach, but instead of us talking just the genes and how we got here, it's about how our genes are influencing our actions in our present day, making it more biological. So, if we think about what associations enhance survival, these tend to be some things that are like fear, right? If we learn to fear certain objects or certain dangerous situations, we are more likely to survive, right? It makes us more biologically prepared to survive. When we learn things, though, a lot of times we're going to see, especially animals, revert to their biologically predisposed patterns. When an association doesn't enhance their survival, it's often going to be unlearned or forgotten pretty quickly. For example, if we have a dog with the nature to bark at their visitors thinking that there is an intruder that's going to attack their family, they are more likely to sit quietly when they're taught to through rewards and punishments. However, it's a behavior that's going to be pretty quickly unlearned, especially under stress. The dog is probably going to drift back to barking at strangers. So, there's also the social learning theory. So this one is going to talk about how other people's influences and the expectations we feel from them can sometimes shift our behaviors. Now, there's 2 big ideas here. One is Bandura's social learning theory that says we learn by observing and imitating the actions of others. And we notice whether or not it's being rewarded or punished. So we're more likely to copy a behavior that has been rewarded and more likely to avoid doing something that's been punished. For example, if a child sees their older siblings bringing home good grades for their report card and they get a reward for it, they are more likely to try and mimic it, right? Whereas if their older brother does not get rewarded, they're less likely to copy it. And if their older brother gets punished, there's a good chance they're not going to do the same thing, or they'll do their best to not. So there is a special term for this observational learning that we're going to use in this class. It's going to be vicarious conditioning. This is where we're learning through others' experiences, so learning from their rewards or punishments. This is us not necessarily learning from their expectations, but from what we see the expectations held from others for that person. So vicarious is learning through another person's experience. So modeling is going to be us copying a particular behavior. The more similar models are to us, the more likely we will tend to mimic their behavior. And we'll get more into the details of this theory later on in the unit. There's also Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, and we'll see this again when we talk in development. This is the idea that children and people in general learn through social experiences where we are brought up through different levels. So this would happen, especially in like a math class. We're going to look at the things that you are capable of doing on your own, right? Like if you're able to add, we would say that's things that are in your zone of actual development, our little yellow dot here. And we can expect you to be able to maybe start adding things with some algebraic letters and being able to solve those kinds of equations. Those would be something we can scaffold you to help you be able to do it with just a little bit of assistance. If you're only able to do some addition, we're probably not going to be expecting you to do full-on calculus derivatives and integrals, but one day you could do that, and that would be in your zone of eventual development. So all the steps it takes to bring you up to that eventual development, that's going to be in that blue zone of proximal development, the things that you can do with assistance. Now this is a bit of a different kind of social learning theory because this is more about cognitive tasks, and in this unit we're again focusing a bit more on behaviors. So kind of summarizing our approaches to learning, we have the behaviors that are going to say psychology should just be about behavior. We are going to try to control it, predict it, and pretty much ignore mental processes. There's the biological approach that is going to be looking at our preparedness, our genetic predispositions, allowing us to learn what we can, right? And the fact that we will easily unlearn things that are against our instincts through instinctual drift. We also have the cognitive approach that says we are going to change our behaviors based on expectations, based on our prior experiences, really emphasizing those mental processes that are ignored by the behaviorists. And our last one is the sociocultural approach, where we learn from watching and imitating others, learning through models as well as vicarious conditioning, right? Noting that we change our behavior based on the reactions of others to not just our behavior, but also others' behavior, to follow the social norms and expectations. So there's always the biopsychosocial approach. Remember that this tends to be the most real-life approach that people will use, but we're also going to look at some of the original lenses that help us create the theories that we're studying in this class. So today I'm going to briefly introduce you to some of the kinds of learning that we have going on in this unit. We have learning happening through association, which is our mind naturally connecting to events or stimuli. We have stimuli, which is any sort of event, agent, physical, energy, chemical, light wave, sound wave that activates a sensory receptor. These then create a response. Right? A response is some sort of action or measurable unit of behavior that we are going to have. So for example, they can be voluntary, like pressing a lever, or they can be more like sneezing, coughing, heart racing, those sorts of things. So we'll see both voluntary and involuntary responses in this unit. Our two main types of associative learning that we're going to be doing are classical conditioning and operant conditioning. They work quite a bit differently, and we'll be spending a whole day on each of them. Our classical conditioning is going to be a stimulus-stimulus association, where we're relating two stimuli together to elicit some sort of involuntary or autonomic response. Whereas the operant conditioning is going to be an association between our behavior and its consequence, and this is going to shape more voluntary responses. Another kind of learning that doesn't really fit into either of those is habituation. And this is a change in our behavior based on experiences. If we experience a stimulus again and again, have that repeated exposure, we're likely to have a decrease in our unconditioned response to a stimulus. For example, it used to be that I was in the 300 building, and in that classroom at Round Rock High School, we had a lot of construction from 620. You could hear the jackhammers going, and it would make it sound like someone was jumping on the ceiling. And students used to jump every time they heard the sound of a jackhammer. However, after a few weeks of school, students no longer reacted to the sound of the jackhammer because they were pretty used to it. Maybe you found this happens to you this year with the increased use of the intercom system. Instead of expecting some sort of bad announcement whenever we hear the dit, maybe you're used to the fact that it's probably just Mr. Butler here to make a dad joke. Another example not related to school would be something like these crows at the bottom. If a farmer introduces a scarecrow into a field, scarecrows might initially be afraid of it. However, as they experience that nothing really all that bad happens every time they fly by it, they end up getting used to it and no longer reacting to it, making the scarecrow a little bit useless. Now, this is different from some other terms we're going to talk about this unit, so I do want you to keep in mind and think about how is this different from sensory adaptation from our sensation and perception unit? And how is it different from extinction, which we'll see later on this unit? So, I'm going to end off here with translating some AP Psych terminology that we're going to see quite a bit this unit. I want you to think about these terms not in the way you typically use them outside of the classroom, but breaking them down into the language that I'm going to give you here. This will be your little translation guide, so you can always come back to this. So, first thing is conditioned will always mean something has been learned. It's not a natural behavior, it's something that we have manipulated and changed into happening. If something is unconditioned, it'll be the opposite. So rather than saying unlearned, I'm going to say it's natural. It's something we never had to learn. It tends to be something that's more innate. A stimulus is always going to be a noun or a thing. Right? Some sort of physical wave, some sort of sound, smell, taste, something like that. A response is always going to be some sort of verb or action. So this can help you sort your stimuli and your responses. When it comes to operant conditioning, we have quite a few terms that are going to be a little bit different from use outside of the psychology classroom. When we say positive in this unit, I need you to be thinking adding. Not good things, we can always add bad things. So positive means we add. Negative is going to mean we remove. Doesn't mean bad. We can take away a good thing, right? Or we can take away a bad thing, right? If I took away homework, you'd probably think it's a pretty good thing. Then we have our punishment and reinforcement. This probably means kind of what you think it does. Punishment is going to be anything that decreases a behavior. And reinforcement will be the opposite. It'll be anything that increases a behavior. Then we're going to have some different schedules that we talk about later. When we use them, think about fixed as being something that is set. There's a specific number involved. Variable is going to mean it varies, or it can be random. If we have something on an interval, it means it's based on time. And if we have something on a ratio schedule, it's going to be based on actions. So we'll continue to look at these words in context of our different kinds of conditioning throughout this unit, but do feel free to come back to this anytime that you're feeling a bit unsure as to what some of these vocabulary mean. All right, this is going to be a fun unit all about learning. Be sure to add as many examples to your notes as you can. This unit can be quite fun, but there's a lot of technical pieces, right? So do your best to include as much as you can in your notes, and don't be afraid of adding examples and asking questions to your teachers. Thanks. Bye.